It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and a privilege and an honor to be here in such august company. And it's not just particularly nice to be here with the leadership both of the university and the city, but when you are a public speaker, you're in public and you speak. And all too often, that's both where it starts and where it ends. But the real motivation in public speaking is the action that might follow. And for that, you need champions and you need leadership. So when I tell you it's an honor, President Katz and Mayor, to be here with you, I mean that quite genuinely, and I thank you all for the opportunity. The other thing I wanted to say is I love dolphins. The gray was an easy match. I do have to say that the pastel green, and I'm sort of guessing at that, was a little outside my customary color wheel, but I can learn to love it, I think. So thank you very much. It was 6 men of Indistan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." Whoops, was very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Indistan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So often theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant not one of them has seen. Well, my friends, I fear we're prone to much the same tendency in epidemiology, nutritional epidemiology in particular. So my mission here in the time we spend together is to convey the view from altitude, the big picture, the forest through the trees, or if you will, the elephant in the room. Now, when you look from altitude, whoops, a little hard to control this. When you look from altitude, you see the many. And there is, I concede, a potential liability in that, and that's the possibility of overlooking the needs of just the one. So while I will spend my time this evening talking about the big picture, the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens, if you will, I think it's important to acknowledge that one of the prominent trends in modern medicine is personalization. And I can make a bow to that. Yes, that too is important. So for instance, my good friend at Stanford University, Christopher Gardner and his colleagues, has run studies where they put people on all the different popular diets to see who loses the most weight and who has the greatest improvement in their metabolic profile. But Dr. Gardner is not interested in which diet wins, because no diet wins. All diets work, all diets fail. There's really not much of a difference. What he's interested in is, why do some people do well on any given diet, and why do other people on the exact same diet do less well? And they might do better on a different diet. Can we customize? So he's now running a trial called Diet Fits, looking to customize dietary prescriptions to genetic profile. And I think that kind of research is full of promise. Similarly, fascinating study in the very prominent journal Cell, demonstrating that glycemic responses to the same foods, those are blood sugar responses after a meal, vary depending on the composition of the microbiome. So this kind of customization is absolutely where personalized medicine, nutrigenomics, microbiomics can help take us. But I don't think we need to talk anybody into that. Everybody's sort of waiting for that. So as we think about the many, we can acknowledge that there is a great deal of human diversity and that it's relevant to the things we do with diet and lifestyle. But out of many, one, am I supposed to aim this in a particular direction? E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And I think what we tend to overlook is that we are many individuals, but we are one species, one great big human family. And I don't really think we need to choose. I think there's a basic theme of healthy living that pertains to us all, and we can customize within that theme. In other words, this little girl can have her watermelon and eat it to correspond with her genetic polymorphisms too. And so that's the case I'd like to make this evening. So on the menu, we started with elephant bits. We considered E pluribus unum. We'll now talk about the dark wood, Archimedes' lever, a fork in the road, which way to point the clicker, choices, the big spoon, voices, fork in the road revisited, and elephant bounds. Are there any questions about the agenda at all? Perfect clarity all around? Delighted to hear it. All right, the dark wood. The dark wood I have in mind is the dark wood of modern epidemiology, where chronic diseases kill people. And it's worse than that because these are chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia. They don't just kill people prematurely. They are chronic diseases. Before ever they take years from life, they first take life from years. And we've known for a long time what the leading causes of premature death are. Heart disease is number 1, cancer is number 2, stroke is number 3, respiratory disease is number 4, diabetes number 5. So it is, so it has been, and for the foreseeable future, so it shall be. Except it hasn't helped us very much to think of things that way. And so there's a different way to think of this. There's a case to be made that in 1993, these chronic diseases stopped being causes of premature death because they aren't really causes at all. They are, in fact, effects. And that was the point of this seminal article, which came out just as I was completing my second residency in preventive medicine. I would say, in many ways, this was a founding stone of my career in preventive and lifestyle medicine. Bill Foege and Mike McGinnis analyzed all of the mortality data in the United States, trying to explain what accounted for premature deaths. And they weren't interested in what we, sleepy residents in hospitals at 3 o'clock in the morning, wrote on death certificates. They said, those aren't causes. You're not telling us anything we didn't know when you fill out a death certificate and say that somebody who died of complications of heart disease had coronary atherosclerosis. What we really want to know is what caused that. So they got their arms around that issue, wrestled the data under control, and reached the conclusion that a list of 10 modifiable factors were the true root causes of premature death in the United States. And those 10 factors collectively accounted for all of the premature deaths that occur in our country every year, but for a rounding error. Now, some of the factors on McGinnis and Foege's list are modifiable by any one of us: diet, physical activity, and so forth. Some of them are only modifiable by all of us working in concert, or we need the help of our civic leaders. Things like traffic-related accidents, guns, toxic exposures in the environment, and so forth. Sometimes the best, and sometimes the only robust defense of the human body resides with the body politic. But overwhelmingly, the action was in the realm of personal behaviors. The first 3 things on McGinnis and Foege's list, just the first 3, accounted for 80% of the premature deaths in our country. And those 3 things were tobacco use, poor diet, and lack of physical activity, or as I like to call them for ease of memory if nothing else, bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. 80% of the premature deaths in our country every year as of 1990. The paper was published in 1993. Pretty astounding, quite an epiphany. The only problem with it is the vintage. Those are rather old data. I presume you like your data fresher than that, right? Although it is worth considering, there's something quite interesting in the vintage of these data. We knew how to eliminate 80% of premature deaths and chronic diseases 24 years ago. And we all have cause to ask ourselves and one another, what have we done with that information? We'll return to that theme. In any event, if you like fresher data, no problem. 10 years later, Ali Maghdad and colleagues at the CDC reanalyzed this issue, reaching substantially the same conclusion. All that had really changed in the span of that decade is that the gap between tobacco as the #1 cause of premature death and the combination of bad use of feet and forks as #2 had narrowed. It had narrowed for one good reason: we were smoking less, and one not so good reason: deteriorating use of our feet, degenerating use of our forks, worsening epidemics of obesity and diabetes to show for it. This then was the dark wood of modern epidemiology in 2004, also getting to be an old vintage. You prefer fresher data, right? Let's jump ahead then to 2009, Earl Ford and colleagues at the CDC published results of survey research conducted among 23,000 adults living in and around Potsdam, Germany. The researchers asked these 23,000 people about 4 factors related to their health. They asked them, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? And that's what I'm supposed to be talking about this evening, so let's pause there for just a second. They asked them, do you eat well, yes or no? Well, clearly their definition of eating well must have involved adjustment for the concentration of gluten, consideration of whether or not the food was genetically modified, and a very esoteric ratio of these fatty acids to those fatty acids, to say nothing of the distinction between intrinsic and added sugar and other adjustments into the bargain, right? I mean, obviously. No. They defined eating well as habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, and it was enough. It was enough. Despite all the noise our culture makes all the time about how complicated diet is, they said if you eat vegetables, fruits, and whole grains routinely, you're eating well. If you don't, you're not. And it was enough. Enough for what? I'll tell you in a second. But they asked, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? Are you physically active on a regular basis, yes or no? And do you have a healthy weight, yes or no? And they then went on to compare the two ends of the spectrum. So they compared, I don't smoke, I eat well, I'm active, my weight's fine, to I smoke, eat badly, don't exercise, and my weight's kind of out of control. These people, over the entire multi-year span of the study, had an 80% lesser rate of developing any major chronic disease than these people. Flip the switch from bad to good on any one of these factors, and the probability of developing any major chronic disease goes down about 50%, but fire on all 4 cylinders. And as best we can tell, the lifetime probability of ever developing heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, the slings and arrows of modern epidemiologic misfortune, goes down a stunning 80%. Now imagine if the news were to break tomorrow. Used to be front page above the crease, now it's on a glowing screen, but whatever you like to read, there's a new drug available. It's been approved by the FDA, don't worry about it. It's available in bountiful supply. It's shockingly inexpensive and stunningly free of side effects, safe enough for children and octogenarians alike, and taken once daily for the rest of your life will reduce your risk of ever developing any major chronic disease by 80%. Who do you call first? Your doctor for a prescription or your broker to buy stock in the company selling the stuff? Frankly, I think both would be excellent ideas, but for the fact that there is no such pill. And in my professional opinion, there never will be any such pill, but lifestyle is exactly that medicine. And we've known about it since 1993 at least, and arguably since the early wisdom of Hippocrates. Anyway, if you happen not to like Potsdam for some reason, and obviously you prefer Jacksonville, and with excellent reason, I might say, or if you prefer fresher data, these findings were reaffirmed in a cohort study in the UK a few years back, reaffirmed yet again in another cohort study, I'll figure this out before I'm done, here in the US. And frankly, this finding, an 80% variance in the rate of premature death and all chronic disease, is one of the more impressive repetitive drumbeats in all of the peer-reviewed literature, with study after study after study after study showing these effects. This one is the Diabetes Prevention Program, a $174 million clinical trial, 3,500 adults on the brink of diabetes randomly assigned to usual care, drug treatment with metformin or glucophage, and a lifestyle intervention. It's an excellent drug. Metformin prevented diabetes a third of the time. 1 in 3 people who would have developed diabetes did not. Lifestyle is a much better drug. It prevented diabetes 2 times in 3. Twice as good as the best drug we've got. 58% of the time, people did not develop diabetes that would have because they ate a moderate, sensible, balanced diet and got routine physical activity, the stuff that you have in the works throughout the city of Jacksonville. And again, Mayor, my thanks, because ultimately it's the translation of the oratory into action that really matters and is the measure of us all. And this drumbeat in the literature telling us over and over again of the power of this short list of lifestyle factors over nothing less than our medical destinies reverberates to our very pith and marrow, to within the double helix of DNA. This study, whoops, it's going to be a little touchy here. This study by my friend Dean Ornish and colleagues involved 30 men with early stage prostate cancer. And as some of you may know, in its early stages, prostate cancer may or may not require treatment. We can't tell. It might progress, it might not progress, and that invites what's called watchful waiting. So under medical supervision, you wait to see if the cancer is going to progress, and then you react if it does. But Dr. Ornish and colleagues thought we can do better than just watch and wait. While we're doing that, let's give these men the benefit of lifestyle as medicine. And so they did. Optimal plant-based nutrition, routine physical activity, obviously no tobacco, and in addition, plenty of good sleep, stress mitigation, strong social interactions. Or, as the immediate past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, what I like to call the 6-cylinder engine of lifestyle as medicine: feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, love. Fired on all 6 cylinders. And over a span of several months, went on to study not so much the men, and not so much the cancer in the men, but preferentially the genes in the men with the cancer. And what they found is that the lifestyle intervention took 500 cancer suppressor genes, or rather 500 cancer promoter genes, and dramatically downregulated their expression, and 50 cancer suppressor genes shown here and dramatically upregulated their expression. Left is before, right is after, red is off, green is on. And this is a change in genetic activity directly attributable to a change in lifestyle. And this is not just one study, but actually this is a whole branch of the literature. And so at the start of the genomic age, we had the misguided notion that DNA was destiny. It's generally not true. There are rare exceptions: sickle cell anemia, Huntington's disease, where the gene means you'll get the condition, or 2 copies of the gene. But for the most part, DNA is not destiny, because our lifestyles actually will change what our very genes do. So to a degree our culture mostly ignores, dinner is destiny. And every other thing we do every day as well. And we even have evidence that dinner and breakfast and lunch and physical activity and other elements of lifestyle can reshape the actual architecture of our chromosomes. Those green tips are called telomeres. They're caps at the ends of our chromosomes. The length of our telomeres is the single most potent predictor in all of biology of the length of healthy lifespan. Not quite a guarantee. You can have long telomeres. It's still a bad idea to get hit by a train. But in general, potent correlation between long telomeres, long healthy life. And there's evidence in fact linked to Nobel Prize-winning work in medicine by Elizabeth Blackburn at the University of California, San Francisco, showing that lifestyle interventions, lifestyle practices, can lengthen our telomeres. We can change not just the activity of our genes, but the architecture of our chromosomes with lifestyle. And there's evidence that we can overcome a genetic deck that's stacked against us by playing the hand particularly well. Everybody hear me okay? I notice when I get close to that speaker, we've got a buzz. All right. So this was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine limited to adults who had established markers of high genetic risk for heart disease, showing that their rates of heart disease could be cut in half with a lifestyle intervention. And this is the power of epigenetics. 95% of our chromosomal real estate is not genes. It's levers and switches that tell the genes what to do, and that is malleable. We don't get to change what genes we have. We do get to change the instructions our genes receive daily about what to produce and what to do, and that effect seems to win out. So I think the case can be made, and indeed dare hope the case has just been made, that the master levers of medical destiny are in your hands and mine, and have been all along. They are not the tools of the medical trade. They are not the stethoscope I've draped across my shoulders these past 25 years. They're none of the technology in hospitals, not PET or SPECT or fMRI or robotic surgery. The master levers of medical destiny are what we do every day with our feet, our forks, and our fingers. And I trust you know what Archimedes said about levers. Give me one long enough and I can move the whole world. Make no mistake. These levers are long enough and should long since have served to move the whole world of modern epidemiology and public health to a better place. But, alas, we like to say knowledge is power. Would that it were so. The gap between what we know, indeed what we have long known, and what we do with what we know belies that wishful thinking. And again, that's why it's so important to have leaders. And of course, we all are leaders in our own lives, in our own households, but leaders at multiple levels here in the audience tonight. Because, my friends, the charge before us all is not to earn the next Nobel Prize in medicine, blazing a trail into the frontier of the unknown. The task is to translate what we have long known into what we routinely put to good use at last. Because these 24 years later, we are mired in epidemics of obesity and diabetes. Our children are succumbing to chronic diseases at ever younger ages. Should current trends persist, by the middle of this century, it's projected that well over 100 million people in the United States may have diabetes, and we can't pay the bills now, and there are less than 30 million diabetics. What a travesty that would be. What a tragedy it would be to bequeath to our children and grandchildren that blighted future, ever more chronic disease starting at ever younger age, ever more premature death, when we have known for literal decades how to make 80% of it go away. Knowledge is not power, and that begs the question, why not? Why have we not yet done more with what we know? Something fairly monumental must be impeding our progress, and I think something fairly monumental is. In essence, if you take this, Homo sapiens in their native habitat, you add this, the modern environment, you get something kind of like this. Yes, the ultimate mulligan, right? In much the same way as if you took this and added this and got this. And I give you my figurative trademark for 25 years now, the polar bear in the Sahara. Now, when my wife and I first put this slide together way back then, there was no imminent threat of this actually happening to polar bears. And alas, I'm not sure we can be confident about that anymore, but that is a different topic. For the most part, I'm not going to get too far into climate change tonight, so you'll have to invite Al Gore to the next spot in the Distinguished Series. He'll tell you all about that. Now, my point is adaptation. Polar bears are marvels of survival, but obviously adapted to only one particularly harsh environment. And my point is, the very traits and tendencies that make them polar bears, that make them able to thrive in the cold of the Arctic, conspire against them in the heat. Not just the heat of a warming Arctic, but certainly the heat of the Sahara in summer. What keeps you alive in the cold cooks your goose here. And my point is, we are the same. We human beings are a species. We have adaptations to a particular native habitat. A land of golden arches isn't it. And we are polar bears in the Sahara. Throughout most of human history, calories were relatively scarce and hard to get, and physical activity was unavoidable. It did not require gym membership or specialized footwear. It was called survival, and everybody just did it every day. We have devised a modern world where physical activity is scarce and hard to get, and calories are unavoidable. Houston, we have a problem, and Jacksonville, and every place in between. I submit to you that as a species, we have no native defenses against caloric excess or the lure of the couch, never having needed them before. No native defenses, that is, save one. Great big Homo sapien brains. We are arguably smarter than the average bear and can think our way out of this mess of our own devising. And that, my friends, is the challenge before us all. As we confront that challenge, I think it bifurcates immediately into two component parts. The first is, can you even get there from here? The modern world is so far from a world conducive to wholesome foods, direct from nature, routine physical activity as part of every day, enough sleep, avoiding stress. I mean, can you even get there from here? And it can feel quite overwhelming, but my answer is yes, one sandbag at a time. Okay, we're up against a flood of highly processed, hyper-palatable, nutrient-dilute, energy-dense, glow-in-the-dark, bet you can't eat just one kind of foods. A constant flow of marketing dollars telling us to overeat the very foods that propel us toward obesity and chronic disease. Wave after wave of technological advance, giving us gadgets and gizmos that do all the things our muscles used to do at work and at play. Okay, a great big obesogenic, morbidogenic flood, but we can contain that flood with a levee, and we can build that levee one sandbag at a time. I've used this metaphor throughout my career to keep me strong, to keep me going, because it can feel overwhelming. I'm routinely introduced in a lovely way, as I was this evening, as an expert in preventing obesity. Yeah, except throughout the entire span of his career, rates of obesity have been rising. Okay, well then, he's an expert in preventing chronic disease. Second memo, throughout the entire span of his illustrious career, rates of chronic disease, yeah. So, you know, I sometimes feel like I pretty much suck and should just run up the white flag. And I think about the levee, and I think, you know, you can be doing good work. But first of all, you're not going to do it alone. No one person builds a levee. All you can do is stack sandbags. And it doesn't matter how good your sandbags are, unless you've got enough other sandbags, it's not going to be enough. And it doesn't matter how much good, hard work you've done, because until your levee is higher than the floodwaters, your feet are going to be wet. But one fine day, when you've done all the necessary work in the company of other good people, the height of your levee tops the height of the flood, the ground at your feet dries out, and a world of opportunity opens up before you. This keeps me going. I am a professional sandbagger. I'm in the company of many others such, and proud to be, and I think together we can build the levee. I think we can dry out the land and open up all those trails of possibility. And just a couple of quick examples here. So this is really what I spend my time doing when I'm not traveling and giving talks. I'm back at home figuring out what's the next sandbag. I want to make practical, tangible contributions to the levee myself, in the company of many others doing the same. And if this were a different lecture, I could run through all the ones we've constructed and tested over the years, but just a couple to give you a taste. And in this instance, a literal taste. So Catherine was already introduced, my wife. She founded Cuisinicity. It's a recipe website freely accessible to all. Help yourselves, love the food that loves you back. And the idea really was precipitated by our kids saying, you know, these fantastic recipes that you make for us, Why don't you make them available to everybody? Let's pay this forward. So the kids suggested it. Catherine's done the heavy lifting. What we routinely say, she likes to say, I'm nutritious, she's delicious. Okay, I can go with that. That's true too. But what we like to say is that I'm theory, she's practice. So, I know a lot about nutrition. Catherine grew up in southern France, so, basically endowed with the legacy of the great French Mediterranean cuisine, met my fussy nutrition standards. We produced something really unique. We have 5 children. We have thrived on this diet all these years, and Quizinicity pays it forward. And here's an example. This chocolate lava cake is vegan. It has only 6 ingredients. They are dark chocolate, black beluga lentils, walnuts, medjool dates, and sweet potato, right? And flax meal. And that's it. There's no added sugar except the sugar that's in the dates and it's part of the dark cocoa. Spectacularly good, tastes as good as it looked. Beautiful example of you having your cake and eating it too. It's incredibly nutritious, unbelievably delicious. Lots of recipes like that. Simple, great. Help yourselves. Sandbag in the levee. Everybody who can produce one more really wholesome, nutritious meal or dish at home, it's a step in the right direction. So visit Quizinicity.com. Pay it forward if you don't have any reason not to. If you enjoy the recipes, tell your friends about it. Let's teach everybody how to make meals that are as delicious as they are nutritious, and we can all love food that loves us back. And then this is the part where I have to make a disclosure because I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I've always looked over the course of my career at how can you get stuff done. A lot of it's been in academia. A lot of it has been giving programs away, but every now and then it's private sector activity. So I founded a company of my own where we are reinventing dietary intake assessment, which is very important in all of the efforts to know what are people eating now, what should they be eating, and how can they get there from here. And this is called Diet Quality Photo Navigation, or DQPN. But when you see the app launched, it'll be called Diet ID, and I believe we have a 2-minute video to tell you just a little bit about that.
Getting to a better diet for health or weight loss is like a journey. You need to know where you're starting. You need to know your destination. And you need to know the route in between. And this simple dietary information has been very elusive. Until now, identifying your starting diet has been a tedious process, requiring food by food, meal by meal, or even day by day details from you. This time-consuming process is labor-intensive, memory-dependent, and prone to inaccuracies in approximating your actual diet. Not anymore. Now you can determine where you are, where you want to go, and how to get there in mere seconds. Thanks to Diet ID. Diet ID starts with a few brief questions to help us focus on the diets relevant to you and your region of the world. Diet ID then sorts and presents you with photos of relevant diets. For each of these, we already know the overall quality and precise nutrient makeup. All you have to do is pick the one that looks most like your diet, just like choosing the clearer image of the eye doctor. And now we know all the nutrient details of your diet, all in a matter of seconds. In just seconds more, you or your health coach can identify your specific diet destination. This diet ideal is based on your goals, priorities, and preferences. All you do is select the diet you want to adopt from our library. And now we know all the nutrient details of your goal diet, also in a matter of just seconds. And then we help you map the path from where you're starting to where you want to go. You can choose the faster route or a more leisurely one. Diet ID is like a GPS for your diet. It just got a lot easier to get there from here. Picture your good health with Diet ID.
Has anybody ever filled out a food frequency questionnaire or 24-hour recall or food diaries? To put it bluntly, a pain in the ass, right? A pain in the ass for you, a pain in the ass for the researchers to analyze, and incredibly inaccurate into the bargain. We can determine baseline diet using this method in about 30 seconds, and we can do it through the face of a smartwatch. So for the first time ever, anybody have a Fitbit? Talks to you about activity, doesn't talk to you about nutrition, right? Because it really can't. There's no way to know what your baseline diet is and direct you from there. This has the potential to change that. So we'll be launching this next month. It's entrepreneurial. I am running this business, but the idea was another sandbag in the levee to try and advance the overall mission. So lots of sandbags. I've worked on some. Other good people work on many. But there's a second problem. So the levee is, can we get there from here? But there's a prerequisite issue, and that is, do we even know where there is? You can't get there from here if you don't know where there is. So with regard to fingers, I think we're probably okay. Smoking is bad. Not smoking is better. No dissent, right? We're all in agreement there. That's an easy one. With regard to feet, we're probably in good shape too. Moving them is good. Sitting on our rear ends all the time, not so much. But when it comes to forks, there's the rub. Because somebody comes along every day, at least every week, to tell us that everything we thought we knew about nutrition up until yesterday was wrong, throws everybody under the bus and expects us to start all over again, right? This is how the book sales run. This is how Good Morning America and the Today Show run. And so if you're paying attention to this trend, you're hopelessly befuddled about the basic feeding of Homo sapiens, if not the other aspects of care. And this, I think, invites people to ask the time-honored question, what to trust about food? And it brings us to a fork in the road. Along one tine, we remain forever befuddled about the basic feeding of our cells. I'd like to propose an alternative tine, and this really has been the focus of my life's work. So I've written 3 editions of a nutrition textbook for health professionals, nutrition and clinical practice. It's at the bottom of the slide. The 3rd edition came out in 2014, has about 10,000 scientific citations. It's the obligatory view from altitude. And then this citation up here at the top was a commissioned review paper for Annual Review of Public Health. Same basic theme. Can we say what diet is best for health? So I've worked on this most of my career, but I'm in excellent company. Dariush Mozaffarian is the dean of the Friedman School of Nutrition at Tufts University. Jim Mann is a leading researcher at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Frank Hugh, the senior author of that 3rd article cited there, is now chair of the nutrition department at the Harvard School of Public Health. And here's an interesting tidbit. So this paper you see by Dr. Hugh and his colleagues, Prevention and Management of Type 2 Diabetes, Dietary Strategies, it came out around the same time as my review paper, Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health? And Dr. Hugh and I are good friends, and we recognized that the conclusions in these 2 completely independent papers were so similar, despite not working with one another at all, that we ought to tell the world something about that. So we got together and wrote this in the Huffington Post, and you may recognize the title as the title of tonight's talk, Knowing What to Eat, Refusing to Swallow It. And we both agreed the issue is not confusion. The issue is pseudo-confusion, all the stuff that gets in the way of people knowing the truth. So when you look without bias at evidence for or against low-fat diets, vegan diets, low-glycemic diets, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, diabetes prevention program, paleo diets, low-carb diets, Mediterranean diets, what you hear about in our culture all the time is why my diet can beat your diet. And really all that matters is none of that, but actually the olive in the middle. Because what makes good diets good is what they have in common with all other good diets. And that olive was pretty nicely skewered by Michael Pollan when he said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I mean, really, that's the beating heart of a good diet. He nailed it right there, just those few words. Now, admittedly, that leaves a fair amount to the imagination. That's actually not a bad thing. What it means is you're the cook in your kitchen. In other words, you can customize. Adhere to the theme. Eat real foods, lots of plants, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. When you're thirsty, mostly drink water. If you do that, you can't go too far wrong. You want to have some dairy? Do. You want to eat eggs? Do. You want to have fish and seafood? Do. You want to have some poultry? Do. You want to eat some meat? Do. But mostly eat minimally processed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. And when you're thirsty, drink plain water. And you cannot go too far wrong. Honestly, that's it. Simple, right? I'm writing a whole book about this. Can you believe that? I mean, the book should be like, you know, the same line 4 times, the end, thank you. It's a whole book. Crazy. Anyway, Pollan pretty much nailed it. He's not alone. The 572-page Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report, not the official dietary guidelines for Americans. The mayor should be here to hear this. The official dietary guidelines are political gobbledygook. They're what politicians think we ought to be told about what actual scientists think is true. This is what actual scientists think is true. And it took them 572 pages to say what Michael Pollan said in 7 words. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Almost a haiku, right? And I was privileged to co-chair a meeting with Walter Willett, the former chair of nutrition at Harvard, a couple of years ago in Boston, where we brought nutrition experts from all around the world, and we argued with one another for several days, but we produced a consensus statement about the common ground. And guess what? The common ground was eat plenty of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seed. When you're thirsty, drink plain water, and you cannot go too far wrong. Everybody, everywhere, vegan to paleo, agrees that's the formula, and yet we seem to be mired in controversy, and we keep revisiting things to see if we've gotten it right, so we get these high-profile research papers. The cardiovascular nutrition controversies, so they explored these deep controversies, and at the end of it all, what conclusion did they reach in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology? Here are the revelations. Extra virgin olive oil and oil in general from nuts and seeds, good for you. Shocked? Surprised? Anybody want to fall out of their seat? Berries and fruits, good for you. We need to resuscitate anybody after that revelation. Nuts, seeds, good for you. Green leafy vegetables, good for you. Plant-based proteins, meaning beans and lentils, eat more of that, less red meat, for example, good for you. This is where we landed after sorting out these very arcane mysteries and controversies, right? There are no controversies. We just keep dredging up nonsense over and over and over again and confusing ourselves unnecessarily. I already mentioned Dr. Mozaffarian, Dean of Nutrition at Tufts. They did an analysis there that looked at all of the deaths in the United States for reference year 2012 and the dietary factors associated with premature death. Here's what they found. We would be better off, less likely to die prematurely if we ate less highly processed food, especially processed meat. We would be better off if we ate less fast food, drank less soda, ate more nuts and seeds, more vegetables, more fruits, and if we ate fish and seafood in the place of other animal foods. Again, anything even remotely surprising. This is stuff we probably all thought we have known for decades. And yet all we ever hear about is how hopelessly confused we are. We keep finding our way back to the same fundamental truths, and we keep being told by the media we're hopelessly confused. So even as we're getting all of these answers again and again and again, Time magazine gives us this cover. We get articles telling us butter is back. You heard about that? Butter is back. Compared to what? And by the way, that's the question they often fail to address. Well, you know, yeah, I mean, there's stuff that butter's better than, I suppose, like partially hydrogenated oil that, you know, but not much, definitely not olive oil, so back compared to what? And many studies are, I think, hopelessly misrepresented by both the scientists and the media. Did any of you get the news recently? There was a big study saying that fruits and vegetables aren't good for us anymore. If that happened to come to your attention, that was a result of something called PURE, which is the Prospective Urban and Rural Epidemiology Study, but which I thought should mean poverty undermines reasonable eating. They basically reached the conclusion that high carbohydrate intake was bad for people, but they were studying people in 18 countries, and the highest carbohydrate intake was very poor people living in Bangladesh who only had white rice to eat and really wished they could eat something else. I mean, completely misleading research. So anyway, we keep going round and round in circles. One of those circles of late has been the idea that saturated fat isn't bad for us anymore. Maybe it's even good for us now. How many of you heard that? Saturated fat, it's all fine now, right? That one? Some of you? None of you? Anybody awake? Anybody eat anything ever? Come on, people, give me something. Anyway, there's a lot of noise about saturated fat is fine now, and it's mostly confabulated. There are actually two big studies that found that across the range of saturated fat intake that prevails in populations like the US, from high to low, rates of heart disease are the same both times. And the reason? Well, First of all, the range isn't very wide. Everybody eats too much saturated fat in the United States. But the other reason is there's a critical question, again, that issue of what are people eating instead? Well, in this country, if you eat a bit less pepperoni pizza, you don't replace it with lentils and broccoli, you replace it with low-fat junk food, right? So what we basically found is that there's more than one way to eat badly, and we, the American people, are committed to exploring them all. This was actually investigated by Lee and colleagues, who looked specifically at what happens when saturated fat calories are replaced. And they looked at the various things that could replace those calories. And they found that when saturated fat calories were replaced by unsaturated fat calories, by nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocado, and so forth, rates of heart disease plummeted. When they were replaced by whole grain calories, rates of heart disease plummeted. But when they were replaced by refined carbohydrate and added sugar, like Snackwell cookies, rates of heart disease stayed the same. There is more than one way to eat badly. You're not doing yourself a favor by shifting from one to the other. We can do much better than that. Whoops. And by the way, one of the other things we hear, not only that saturated fat is fine now, which is false, but that there's been inadequate attention to the evils of sugar. Did you get that memo? Right? Nobody's been paying enough attention to sugar. That's also nonsense. There have been dietary guidelines for Americans since 1980. These were the first from 40 years ago. There were 7 takeaway points. Number 5, avoid too much sugar. We've been talking about it for 40 years. We just can't get anybody to listen. Okay, so that's not the problem. And by the way, this is America. There are 2 ways you could potentially reduce your intake of dietary fat as a % of your total calories. There's the right way, and there's the American way. Now, the right way would be to actually eat a bit less fat, but we don't like less in this country. We're not good with less, we like more. There's another way to reduce your intake of fat as a % of calories. Just eat more calories. Keep your fat the same, eat more of everything else. Fat as a % of calories will go down. That's what we've done. Believe it or not, we never cut our fat intake at all. We just increased our intake of grains even more. So we didn't stop eating pepperoni pizza. We just added the Snackwell cookies. And now we're supposed to be confused about why everybody in this country is fat and sick. Well, no, it's not a great mystery. And by the way, in case you don't believe me, you can check out the trends over 40 years for diet in the US at Vox.com. Just type in American diet changes Vox. You'll pull up this flow diagram. It'll show you these really cool images of the diet changing by food category over a 40-year span. And then this, I think, is a critical tidbit. We even know why we're eating more of everything. Michael Moss is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. His book is Salt, Sugar, Fat. His next book, due out very soon, is called Hooked, how the big food companies, like PepsiCo, for instance, got us hooked on Doritos and Tostitos and Fritos and Cheetos. And you don't make Cheetos, do you? Is that somebody? Cheetos, too? Oh, jeez. We're going to need to talk over there. Yeah, okay. So, in any event, what Moss describes in this New York Times Magazine cover story, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food, is how the big food companies hire teams of PhDs, give them functional MRI machines and marching orders to engineer foods we cannot stop eating. When Lay's told us, bet you can't eat just one, it was a threat. And they knew they could take it all the way to the bank, but they're not alone. So this, I think, actually, all due respect, Mr. President, should evoke outrage. I mean, you think about the struggle against epidemic obesity and diabetes, and many of us in this audience, how many of you are parents, grandparents, aunts or uncles, know a kid? Like we're all good. We're all part of the same group here. Here we are struggling with epidemic childhood obesity and diabetes, and we've got big food companies engineering food our kids cannot stop eating. So mom and dad say enough is enough, and they want more, but it's not an accident. So the average parent is up against teams of highly paid scientists using cutting-edge technology with marching orders to hit the bliss point and make food irresistible. Not fair. Where is the outrage, right? In a nation of loving parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles looking out for the well-being of kids, we should collectively be outraged across the political spectrum and say, this has got to stop. This just will not do. You are mortgaging the health of the future generation to fatten corporate profits. This must stop. We will not sanction it. So I'd like to see the outrage. All right, I told you in the beginning about an elephant in the room. This could be the elephant in the room. This is what paleo enthusiasts suggest should be the elephant in the room. Hard to find mammoth these days, to be honest, but more importantly, there are two good reasons why we cannot all adopt a paleo diet, and they all have something to do with the fact that we're not in the Stone Age anymore. First, many people wave the paleo banner as an excuse to eat bacon and pepperoni, and I got news for you. There was no Stone Age pepperoni, right? And in fact, even grain-fed beef is markedly different from the kind of meat our Stone Age ancestors ate. Just to give you a quick for instance, paleoanthropologists estimate that the meat of the Stone Age was a lot like antelope. About 7% of the calories in antelope steak come from fat. Virtually none of it's saturated. Much of it is omega-3, which we now call fish oil. Contrast that with grain-fed beef. 35% of the calories are from fat. Much of it's saturated. None of it's omega-3. It's night and day. That's one reason. The bigger reason, there are nearly 8 billion of us on the planet now. I actually did the math that for 8 billion people to live like Stone Age foragers would require 15 times the surface area of the planet. Cannot happen, right? So we're not in the Stone Age anymore. I don't think the mammoth is the elephant in the room. I think what the elephant in the room is that we are omnivores who have choices to make, and we can make good ones or we can make bad ones. We have choices for fat. This study of Harvard and 100,000 people tells us that the higher the percentage of calories we get from saturated fat, which would be meats, dairy, processed foods, the higher the rates of cardiovascular disease and premature death from all causes. The higher the percentage of calories we get from unsaturated fats, nuts, seeds, avocado, olive oil, fish and seafood, the lower the rates of cardiovascular disease and premature death from all causes. We have choices for protein. Another study out of Harvard, same basic conclusion. The higher the percentage of calories from animal protein, meats, dairy, etc., the higher the rates of premature death. The higher the percentage of protein from plant sources, beans, lentils, and so forth, the lower the rates of premature death from all causes. And here's a direct substitution chart from a 2010 study. And we'll just get through this very quickly because I think we're probably short on time now. But just look at this line. The midline is basically the baseline risk. To the left is risk reduction. To the right is risk increase. So we look down here, beans for beef, the single largest reduction in the risk of heart disease. This was a study in 100,000 women. If we just swapped out beef for beans as a matter of routine, significant reduction in heart disease. But we need to think outside our own skin. This is a changing planet. It's a crowded world. Our dietary choices have major implications for our aquifers. During the peak of the California drought, the New York Times ran an article, an infographic on our contribution to the California drought, and they plotted the water required to produce different foods. Beef was off the charts compared to everything else. An order of magnitude more water is used to basically grow the plants, to feed the cattle, to produce the meat that we then eat, as opposed to just growing crops that we eat directly. An order of magnitude. And, you know, there was a time that didn't matter, but in a thirsty world of nearly 8 billion people, it matters. We all have to be thinking about this. And to be clear, folks, because I'm going to give a very strong eat more plants, less animals message, I didn't ask to be born into a world of nearly 8 billion Homo sapiens, and neither did you. I didn't ask to be born into a time of climate change, desiccating aquifers, greenhouse gas emissions, mass extinction, shrinking biodiversity, all these things. I didn't ask for any of this, neither did you. But we are citizens of this world we were born into, and we could be good or bad stewards of it. And if what we do with our forks impacts the planet, we must think about it. We have no other choice. And however inconvenient it is for me or for you, we're in this together, and I think we have to address it. We have choices for the climate. Interesting article in The Conversation. Meat may be a complicated health question. It's a simple environmental one. The agriculture footprint with regard to carbon is enormous. Much of it has to do with animal husbandry. For the sake of the climate, we need to eat less meat. That's pretty much the conclusion all scientists have reached. And for the sake of biodiversity, we're actually displacing wild animals so we can raise more domestic animals and eat them. And frankly, I don't want to be the guy, you know, who is responsible for the last Borneo that an orangutan might once have climbed being cut down to produce more palm oil, to make more processed food, to feed me. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy that eats the world's last swordfish either. And we're facing these difficult choices now. And our diets at scale have major implications for all of these things. And we even have choices for the economy. This was a fascinating modeling study out of Oxford University projecting decades into the future. Savings to the tune of tens of trillions of dollars with a shift to more plant-predominant diets. Why? Better health outcomes, but also stabilizing the climate, protecting the planet. We have choices, and yet, as we near the finish line here, we've not made much progress. This is the typical American diet, pretty much same as it ever was. This is an image from a book called Hungry Planet, What the World Eats. So at the end here, we come back to this question. Even if it's clear where there is, it does sort of feel like we're not able to get there from here. Or in other words, if lifestyle is the best medicine, we seem to lack the spoons to get the medicine to go down. Now, Lord knows the last thing we need these days is more spoons full of sugar, but we clearly need some kind of spoon to help the medicine go down. So as we think about that, how do we get lifestyle, which we've known since 1993 could eradicate 80% of all chronic disease and premature death, and now we know could save the planet into the bargain? How do we get that medicine to go down? Well, it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like a few of us in white hats on white horses trying to save the world while corporate America mortgages the health of our children for profit. That's got to stop. And frankly, you know, the big suppliers, the big food companies, they're trying to keep the customer satisfied. We have to change the food demand if we want to change the food supply, but there does need to be more corporate responsibility too. I think paying engineers to produce willfully addictive junk food needs to stop, and maybe collective outrage is the antidote. But we're bailing a sinking ship with pipettes. It is being flooded with a fire hose. And if you think I'm kidding, these are breakfast cereals introduced by major food companies this year. So in an age of epidemic childhood obesity, who thinks that sprinkled donut crunch for breakfast is going to help? No, I don't think so, okay? However, the solution could look like this. We got to the moon for 3 reasons so far as I know. We wanted to go, we're an ingenious species, and we knew where to find the damn thing. I think the same formula could get us to a world where there's 80% less chronic disease. I think we want to go, we're still ingenious, we just have to agree we know where there is and stop going around in circles. If we straightened out those circles and made them linear, the progress would be incredible. We are not clueless about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. The big spoon is culture. Lifestyle is the medicine, culture is the big spoon, and we know this thanks to the world's blue zones, 5 places where people routinely live to be 100 and don't get chronic disease. Ikaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. What do they do in all those places? They're very different. High-fat Mediterranean diet in Ikaria and Sardinia, low-fat vegan diet in Loma Linda, traditional Asian diet in Okinawa, omnivorous diet in Costa Rica. In every one of these places, they eat diets of real food, mostly plants. They're physically active. They tend not to smoke. They get enough sleep. They're not stressed out, and they have strong social connections. Feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love every time at the level of culture. They routinely live to be 100. They don't get chronic disease. They go to sleep one night at 102, and they just don't wake up. They go gentle into that good night in the fullness of time. They live long, they prosper with vitality, and they pass peacefully. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. Why can't we all have that? If we rallied around what we know, I think we could all have that. Similar experience with the Chimani in the Bolivian Amazon, cleanest coronary arteries on the planet. Modern day foragers, they eat mostly plants, they do some hunting, absolutely pristine coronary arteries, basically also living something of a blue zone existence, and we even have evidence that blue zones can be transplanted, turned into blueprints. North Karelia, Finland, one of the highest rates of premature death from heart disease in the world in the middle of the 20th century. They took the learnings of Ansel Keys in the 7-country study, shifted from animal food predominant diets to more whole grains, beans, lentils, vegetables, fruits, shifted to seed oils from dairy fat. They slashed rates of heart disease by over 80% and added 10 years to average life expectancy over the past half century. There is no basis for confusion about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. We've long had the relevant evidence. There's just profit to be made from confusion. I worked for Good Morning America. They wanted me to talk about a different diet every week. This, by the way, is why I no longer work for Good Morning America, right? You cannot tell people 2 weeks in a row that vegetables and fruits are good for them. It's boring. Tell them something else. Tell them about the pickle juice diet this week. So, I'm not going to tell them about the pickle juice diet. You're fired. Okay, fine. It wasn't quite like that, but sort of. I said, okay, fine. We've known for decades how to feed ourselves well, but we need people to hear the message, and this is where we end. How do we change the rules of the game so we can win it? It's not for want of knowledge. Our problem is translation. A luminous prize, the potential to add years to lives, life to years, has been lost not in translation, but in want of translation, the failure to translate what we know into what we do, because most people don't know that we know it. So at this stage of my career, in addition to being a sandbagger, I want to take a page from the playbook of an illustrious colleague who wrote up a case report in the peer-reviewed literature about a pachyderm with either extraordinary auditory acuity or possibly uncompensated schizophrenia. We've never known for sure which, but I trust you know the story of Horton and the Who's. Horton heard the Who's. Nobody else did. Everybody know about Horton and the Who's? Okay. In the case of public health, our message is not "we are here." That was the message of the Who's to avoid being boiled to death in hazelnut oil. In the case of public health, our message is "we agree." So I have established a global coalition of leading experts. And when I tell you leading experts, I mean 3 former Surgeons General of the United States, people like Sanjay Gupta, deans of schools and chairs of departments, famous chefs like Alice Waters, Sam Cass, who was the Obama chef, all the years they were in the White House, and many others, to come together and tell the world across the spectrum from vegan to paleo, we all eat more like one another than any of us eats like the typical American. We all agree about the fundamentals, we really do. You never hear us talking about that because we're always invited to come on air and tell you about, the particular thing we're most interested in. But if you ask us how we feed ourselves and our families, a lot like one another. So we now have over 400 experts from 37 countries, ranging from the world's most famous vegan advocates to the founding fathers of the paleo diet, saying we agree. And if what I've been saying makes sense to you, please check out the True Health Initiative at truehealthinitiative.org and add your voice to the chorus. We want more and more people to say, yeah, I want the world to know the fundamentals that we have long known and that experts all around the world agree could eradicate 80% of premature death and chronic disease. We have let that prize languish these 24 years. And so we end back at a fork in the road. For far too long, we have let the luminous opportunity to add years to lives and life to years lie fallow. We have left health on the road less traveled. Collectively, and frankly, I think only collectively, we could finally at last turn knowledge into the power of routine action, translate what we have long known into what we routinely do, put health on a path of lesser resistance, and if ever we get around to doing that, the elephant in the room will look like this. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, so I'll go there first? Oh, you got the mic, and I'll come back to you.
Where does policy fit in?
So, again, let's consider the case of, well, 2 things really. Michael Moss's willfully addictive junk food, and the fact that we've got epidemic childhood obesity, and we are developing cereals like Sprinkle Donut Crunch. I think there's an argument there for supply side regulation. I think willfully engineering food to undermine appetite control, portion control. I think there should be regulations there. I think there should be regulation about food marketing to children. And there's been advocacy for this for years. We're obviously a very divided country on matters of policy. People argue now we're the nanny state. I think we're the nanny state right now. It's just that we're being told what to do by big corporations as opposed to a government that's at least a little bit accountable to us. But I don't think it's fair to directly market willfully addictive food to 5- and 6-year-olds and expect them to defend themselves. And I don't think it's fair to expect their parents to defend their kids from that either, because they're watching TV, they're on the internet, wherever they're exposed, they're bombarded with those messages. It's a huge amount of parental bandwidth to undo all that damage. It's a little bit like being a physician in 2017. It used to be my patients didn't know what was what. Now everybody knows everything and most of it's wrong. It's much harder now. Teaching people stuff when they come in and they're humble and they say, "You're the expert, tell me," relatively easy. But when everybody thinks they already know what's what, huge amount of work just to get back to baseline. Same with kids. If they're already convinced they know what they want and it's bad for them, you have to undo that. It's not fair. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to address some of the critical needs with policy. But unfortunately, the body politic is so divided, a lot of the necessary, from my perspective, policy has stalled. A soda tax. Do I think that would be reasonable? Yeah, all the evidence suggests it's not bad for business. It raises revenue. That revenue can be put to all sorts of good use. It isn't always, but it certainly can be. And it produces net benefit in terms of diet quality. And no, it's not regressive, because you know what is regressive? Type 2 diabetes, which falls disproportionately on poor populations, and it's much more costly than the tax added to soda at a penny an ounce or something. So basically poor people are paying a very high tax on poor diets right now. It's all the cost associated with poor health. So I am an advocate for all sorts of policy. However, I believe in personal responsibility. I believe that at the end of the day, what I do with my feet and my fork is up to me. I would just put it this way. The choices that any of us makes are subordinate to the choices all of us have. I think we need to address both. I think we need to empower individuals. I do think the single most potent way to change the food supply is to change the food demand. And we even have evidence of that. So when Atkins was most famous in the 1990s into early 2002. 2002 is when Gary Taubes wrote a New York Times Magazine cover story, "What if it's all been a big fat lie?" And the idea was we'd fallen in love with low fat, we'd gotten fatter and sicker. And the problem wasn't that we were nincompoops who were exploring lots of different ways of eating badly. The problem was we picked the wrong macronutrient. And by the way, I know Gary. Saying we're friends is probably too much. I think he's been wrong about everything across his entire career. To me, the idea that we cut fat, got fatter and sicker, let's cut carbs now, was absolutely idiotic. But in any event, Atkins came along, Taubes put him into the stratosphere, we had a natural experiment. What happened to the food supply? Every supermarket in the United States, in a span of less than 12 weeks, had low-carb items on their shelves that had never existed before. They manufactured them out of the ether. What would happen if we had a revolution not to shift from one silly way of eating badly to a new way of eating badly, but actually educating people? We want wholesome, minimally processed food. We will not eat junk. If it's junk, it's not food. If it's food, it's not junk. We're done. Well, frankly, the big manufacturers would accommodate us pretty damn quick, too. It's what they do. So I've spent my career trying to change the demand more than the supply and lending my support to Center for Science and the Public Interest, the Rudd Center, which was at Yale, it's now at UConn, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, that are working to address this through policy. Mike Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, tried to do some things regulating soda size, soda tax. But the policy side's really hard in a divided population, right? The legislators can't get stuff done if the public won't stand behind them, and we are a house divided on these issues. So I say, let's do judo instead of karate. Karate's two opposing forces, everybody winds up bleeding. Judo is you take the prevailing forces and say, let's work with this. If we can educate ourselves, change the food demand, everybody only really wants to buy healthy food, then I think we can probably get manufacturers to sell us more healthy food, and a rising tide can lift all boats. So I am a fan of policy. I've just mostly worked on changing the demand side. I think we tend to overlook the primacy of demand over supply, and I've adopted that as my mission.
My question, am I on the mic? Okay. My question is about telomeres. I know you had that up there and the length of your telomeres. Can you influence that? Can you influence the length of your telomeres? And I've also seen, bloggers talking about supplements for telomeres. Just if you could
So let me refer you to the best source on the topic. It's called The Telomere Effect. It's by Alyssa Appel and Elizabeth Blackburn at the University of California, San Francisco. And Dr. Blackburn is the one who won the Nobel Prize for work in this area. And it's pretty comprehensive. So it's about all of the studies looking at all of the lifestyle factors, including nutrient supplements, that actually have been shown to influence telomere length. So the answer to your question is yes, maybe, with regard to supplements. There have been studies of some particular supplements showing a potential effect on telomere length, probably because of influence on gene complexes. And those effects have mostly been shown in animal studies, very limited evidence in people, but some reason to think that the right nutrient supplements could potentially exert an influence there. It's very clear that lifestyle can do it much more reliably. So yes, we can change the length of our telomeres. The only thing that I would offer as any kind of a proviso here, we don't need to eat to feed our telomeres. We don't need to eat to feed our microbiomes. We can pretty much safely assume that if we are eating and living in a way that is conducive to good health, it's probably good for our genes, it's probably good for our chromosomes, and it's probably good for the critters living in our gut too, right? So one of the modern variants on the theme of fads is, I'm going to write a book, and there is one, The Microbiome Effect. So now you need to eat to feed your microbiome, which may give you a whole different set of principles from eating to feed your telomeres and so forth. Get the basic formula for your overall health right. Your telomeres, your genetic activity, your microbiome, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your spleen, and your great left toe are all connected, right? They're all just part of you. But the telomere effect, really good, available on Amazon, answers all those questions in far more detail than I could hope to. Thank you all very much.
At this point, I would like to hand the mic over to President Cost and let him close out our discussion session.
If I could ask you to stay up there one more second.
Sure.
We all learned a great deal tonight, Dr. Katz. I mean, congratulations to you and your wife. You have people in the room you may or may not know. We have the Kegwins here, the Kegwin School of Nursing. You've got senior executives, Marty Chomiak with Johnson & Johnson. You've got the former CEO of Acosta, one of the world's great food companies. I mean, you've got, and I worked at PepsiCo. I agree, that's true.
Am I going to make it out of the room?
Yeah, you're going to do fine, but you're going to need a little help. So you've got faculty, you've got students here. We're just honored to have you and your wife here. It was a wonderful conversation. You've changed what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, of course, but you do that everywhere you go. I'm also impressed you can say someone's a friend and then say you've disagreed with everything he's ever stood for in his whole career. But my last question, and I always reserve the office to ask one last question if you got 2 minutes. There are companies that are out there trying to do good things, and I will not put PepsiCo in that group. You're right, nor Coca-Cola. I wonder if you could give us a thought on that. And then the other side of that is children, 3 to 8 years old. How best to teach them? It's not happening in the elementary schools. Their eyes would be popped wide open seeing just your cartoons tonight. So right. On the one side, who's your allies? On the company side, on the other side, how to educate the children, then we'll let you go have dinner. Thanks
Thank
again.
you very much. So actually, let me put PepsiCo right in the list, both because I think the CEO in Nuri has really tried to do good, and then we had a brief exchange about our mutual friend Derek Yak, who was reporting to you at PepsiCo, I believe. And so Derek worked for many years at the World Health Organization, was one of the leaders in the global campaign against tobacco, was a public health hero, then came to Yale, then went to the Rockefeller Foundation, and then went to PepsiCo. And everybody thought he'd gone over to the dark side. And I think he was Senior Vice President of Agriculture and Health Policy or something, right? And his idea was, I've got a receptive CEO, I really want to try to do good, and he did, and we met multiple times. And It was all very sincere, and a number of things that PepsiCo was trying to do to improve the health and nutrition portfolio of the product line ran afoul of consumer demand. I mean, you know, ultimately you have to account to the shareholders for the business that you do. The business of business is business first and foremost. You know, you weren't going to make and sell what nobody was willing to buy. Where Derek and I wound up having a really interesting conversation, and we weren't able to operationalize it, although I haven't given up on the idea, was the notion that we need to share a taste for change. So, you know, for example, if food companies just make better foods overnight, and we're used to junk foods and we like foods with lots of sugar, salt, and added chemicals, we're not going to like the changes. Your products will tank and you'll go back to the old way. On the other hand, if we want better products and you don't provide any, we have few options, and we can't make good choices if you don't give us good choices. But what about a public health campaign that teaches people about what I call taste bud rehab? Taste buds are very adaptable little fellas. When they can't be with the foods they're used to loving, they learn to love the foods they're with. You can shift to ever more wholesome food, and little by little, you actually habituate to it. One of the reasons Americans like the food they like is because our taste buds are soaking in too much sugar and salt all the time. We could work together to fix that, and what Dr. Yak and I agreed was that it would be very hard for either to do it alone. People can't make good choices if they're not given good options, but it's hard to change the food supply and fail in the marketplace because the demand hasn't been changed. So there are many very virtuous companies. I think some of the big companies are willing to be virtuous, but I think we really sort of need a combined corporate public health effort to say, what are the fundamentals in our culture that we need to address so there's receptivity for better food, and we in the business world can do well by doing good. We're perfectly happy to do good. We have to do well. We've got to report to our shareholders. Nobody wins if our company goes out of business, right? And I completely respect that. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. On the issue of kids, a very practical answer. One of the sandbags I didn't tell you about tonight is a food label literacy program we developed at the Prevention Research Center called Nutrition Detectives, specifically designed to teach 8-year-olds how to identify good food from bad, what to look for in an ingredient list, what to look for in the nutrition facts panel. And we've given out over 50,000 DVDs of this program all around the world. The program's available in English and Spanish. It's in multiple countries, reaching millions of kids. And what routinely happens is kids start out, they pull on mom's elbow at the supermarket and they say, hey, I want the one with Dora the Explorer, whoever the hero of the week is on the front of the package, sprinkled donut crunch maybe. And then they go through Nutrition Detectives, which takes all of 90 minutes. It can be done in school or at home. And at the end of the program, they tug on mom's elbow and they say, we can't buy this, it's got high fructose corn syrup in it. And you know, it's amazing how kids can actually be the agent of change for a health transformation in their families. So we found we could teach the kids, and the kids would teach their parents. Nutrition Detectives is freely available. Just Google it, and you can get it from our shop. It's available online. We've got YouTube videos, instruction manuals, so they could be adopted in local schools. And there are other things that can be done too, but it's a good place to start.
Thank you to have
Thank you. Thank you.